Hi everybody, Dana Litwin here again, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. This week, talking about the very controversial practice of pay-to-play volunteering. And there's a few different types, one of which is not great and I don't recommend. And also this is an area where volunteers and maybe agencies have to watch out for scammers trying to insert themselves in the middle of things to get an unfair fee for people to volunteer. But there are a few legitimate ways you can have pay-to-play volunteering work well for your organization. However, it's always going to be a financial barrier to some people, some potential volunteers not being able to work with your agency, and that has to be very mindfully, seriously, intentionally considered in the pros and cons of putting a pay-to-play policy in place with your organization. The most common pay-to-play that I've encountered has been with corporate groups. It sometimes costs agencies a lot of staff time or resources or tools or paint or whatever to host a corporate group to volunteer with them. So that's kind of probably the most common or the most accepted is there's either a flat fee for a corporate group to send employees to volunteer for an episodic or one-time thing, or there might be a fee per employee, per person volunteering with that corporation that they're sending over. That can vary a little bit, but that kind of helps offset the costs. And being transparent about it is really the most important part. Don't try to ever bait and switch somebody that, oh, your corporate team wants to volunteer with us, and you get partway through the process of booking them, and then they realize that, oh, there's a $300 fee, there's a $500 fee, there's a $20 per person fee, whatever it is, but that's probably the most common. Another really common pay-to-play is voluntourism, where there's costs for flight or housing or food, accommodations in some other country. This is always kind of riding the line between kind of scammy and gross and not great even for the community that's having volunteers placed there. Sometimes it's just a pretty gross money-making scheme for a travel company, essentially, to send people to rural places in other countries or, villages without a lot of infrastructure, and it isn't always helpful to the community that's actually there to have a bunch of rotating foreigners in that they have to entertain and host. So voluntourism is another pay-to-play, and again, the ethics of that and the skeeziness of it kind of depends on the individual situation, but in general, I'm against voluntourism because it tends to do more harm than good and can have a lot of colonial, patriarchal flavors and icky stuff mixed in with it that we're hopefully as a sector trying to avoid. There's also, more commonly, I think, in conservation agencies, there's at least a deposit to help pay for, again, equipment or training or staff time, and to serve as a flake filter. An example I'm going to share is the Wolf and Wildlife Center in Colorado, and they are very transparent on their website, so they're doing a good job on that. But they have, for their own reasons, probably having to do with, I want to work with wolves all summer, and then people show up and they flake out, or it's too much work, or it's too hard, whatever. So they're doing a flake filter by having a $300 deposit per volunteer or intern to be committed to perhaps work and getting on a training track to work with animals at the end of their first 3 months. They get that deposit back. Also at the Wolf Center, any other kind of volunteer, not an intern, and everybody needs to put in a $150 radio deposit. I absolutely understand that because I've worked with agencies where our walkie-talkies, our radios have been dropped, damaged, disappeared, whatever. So attaching a deposit to a specific piece of expensive equipment, I can also understand that. However, the financial burden is higher because this is in a remote area. People have to have their own reliable transportation, car, paying for gas to get to their volunteer commitments at least 2 days a week. These are very long work days at the Wolf Center. It's either 9.5 hours to 12 hours, and you have to commit to at least 2 days a week for 3 months to do that. But if you're having a great time, if you're an intern, if you're on a career conservation path, or you can just afford to do this and you love wildlife and want to learn how to help them, this can be a great opportunity. But it automatically eliminates a lot of other people and probably doesn't represent the diversity of the state of Colorado or the surrounding area to have that financial barrier there. But I understand in that case, why they did it as a flake filter. What I don't understand is it recently came to my attention that Hands On San Diego, which typically is a site that you just go to and find volunteer opportunities, or you can have a nominal fee to have them help set up your corporate employee volunteering. But Hands On San Diego has put their entire website behind a subscription paywall with at least $50 a year required just to look up volunteer opportunities. And that, I think, is not the kind of pay to play that is good for our sector or good for volunteering in general. Whatever their own internal reasons for that chapter doing that, that's not the case with almost every other hands-on chapter or region that I've encountered or worked directly with as a consultant or with colleagues, where their website is their website. And that's not a really good way to compete with, say, Idealist, which is Absorbed Volunteer Match, which does freely have these volunteer opportunities listed on their website with a pretty easy search. It's also possible, of course, for us to use whatever search engines we use and whatever browsers we use to find our own volunteer opportunities and go to the websites of agencies. The big red flag I talked about at the beginning of this video is third-party scammers who try to put themselves in the middle of that, and they either are a complete scam and they just take somebody's money and they never get matched up with volunteering, or worst case scenario, some very dodgy companies that will wink wink, you pay them money for court referred volunteer hours and they will fill out the form with an approved agency to basically forge and commit fraud and, you know, help someone get their 10 hours or their 20 hours or their 100 hours. Those are clearly scams. I was hesitant to include them in pay to play, but I've had enough colleagues stumble across these things or have volunteers tell them, but I paid to get my hours from you, and they never heard of this person and they went through some like skeezy new app or third-party website and just got ripped off. So pay to play can work for corporate things as a flake filter if the work you're doing takes a lot of training, a lot of commitment, a lot of intention. Yes, and it's automatically going to decrease accessibility, equity, inclusion, belonging, things like that. So that's something for you to weigh in your policies, your strategies for volunteer engagement, strategies for how you want the organization to be perceived by the public. This can have a lot to do with public image as well as being welcoming or unwelcoming to volunteers. But let me know what you think about pay to play. Have you ever done it with your organization? Tell me in the comments below. Next week, I will be at the Alive National Summit. Come up and say hi in Sacramento, March 18th, 19th, and 20th. And we'll have some other new Tuesday tips next week. But until then, see you next time.